When I saw the leaks and trailers for this movie, I remembered feeling rather skeptical about its success, like many others, because of how gimmicky it all looked. Not to mention, there was, of course, the shocking truth that the main character was not going to be played by Henry Cavill, but instead by a new guy with a completely different direction, which did not sit well with me at all. Because as you all know, I absolutely love Henry Cavill's Superman, and I am an advocate of that version of the character. And the fact that Cavill got booted from the DC franchise and replaced by a guy who I wasn't even 100% sure was really going to succeed as Superman was a massive eye-opener for me. But then I saw this movie twice, and my perception of it completely changed. This movie is actually a lot of fun to watch. It literally feels like a Smallville revival in the form of a full-length movie. David Cornswet is fantastic as Superman. He literally looks like Tom Welling and Henry Cavill rolled into one. He's got the pretty boy look and height of Tom Welling and the acting personality and size of Henry Cavill. I say acting personality because one of the things that was so great about Henry Cavill's Superman was that he brought a regal-like performance to the role that no other actor has done. Not even Christopher Reeve. And I like Christopher Reeve. But if I'm being honest, most of his take on the character was more cartoon-like than it was believable. Same with Brendan Routh, although that was mostly with his work on Superman Returns. And Tom Welling didn't even really feel like Superman. He just felt like a normal guy playing the role. Tyler Hoechlin's take on the character was just bland and forgettable. Arguably more bland than what people have said about Henry Cavill's Superman. People say that Henry Cavill always looked sad as Superman. Tyler Hoechlin always looked miserable in the role, to the point where even at times when he did try to put on a happy face, he always looked rather creepy. But David Cornswet killed it as Superman. He was absolutely cunning in the role, and more importantly, he was believable. Well done, David. Can't wait to see you in more stuff, my dude. As for the other characters, Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, absolutely amazing. He may actually be my #1 favorite live-action Lex Luthor, and I have never said that about him at all. Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, also fantastic. Not exactly a fan of the casting of Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner, but hey, he did a stand-up job in the role, so it gets a pass. Isabella Moner was also pretty good as Hawkgirl. The guy they got to play Mr. Terrific in this was also pretty good. Definitely not better than Echo Killam, but good enough. He did a stand-up job. The guy who played Perry White was also pretty good. Millie Alcock was outstanding as Supergirl. I cannot wait to see her in a standalone film, because she is amazing. Alongside Anthony Carrigan's Metamorpho, who I could see rivaling Marvel's Century. As far as the story goes, I like how it's structured, because as I said previously, the entire movie feels like Smallville reinvented for the modern age. I've kind of had that same feeling with My Adventures with Superman, where much like Smallville, Superman in that show was portrayed as a young, upcoming superhero. This movie goes in that same exact direction with David Cornswet, which is something I was immensely skeptical about at first. Superman Returns did the same exact thing, and it failed, which is part of the reason why Superman was portrayed the way he was under Zack Snyder and David Goyer in Man of Steel. Because that movie was actually going to be a sequel to Superman Returns. But because Superman Returns bombed so hard, Warner Brothers decided to fully reboot the character in a completely separate movie with Henry Cavill in the role. And thus we got a Superman movie that would explore the tragic reality of Superman's origin. This movie, on the other hand, chose to focus on the later goings of Superman's origin, where Kal-El is already Superman but is still having trouble with finding his place in the world his biological parents sent him to. Kinda like in the same vein as Batman v Superman, but with other members of the Justice League. And I must say, the way James Gunn plays up their origin in this movie is pretty cool. I literally thought the way James Gunn incorporated Mr. Terrific, Guy Gardner's Green Lantern, and Hawkgirl into this movie was going to be forced, especially given the fact that Warner Brothers was not satisfied with how Man of Steel performed. And that's why I initially thought 90% of the stuff introduced in this movie was gimmicky, because none of it really looks like the kind of storytelling tools you would imagine existing in a legitimately good comic book movie. But James Gunn made it work, and for that, I gotta give the movie props. However, this doesn't change my perception of DC and how I think it should be going forward. I still want to see Zack Snyder's story be properly concluded, and I still want to see Henry Cavill in action as Superman on screen. I personally feel as though us respected Snyderverse fans, and I say us because I know it's not just me who has this viewpoint. I personally feel that we have been robbed of a lot of exceptionally good DC films. Having said that, I'm really hoping that the Gunverse, or James Gunn's DCU, whatever you want to call it, succeeds. Because if his DC cinematic universe succeeds, then perhaps the Snyderverse could have a chance of succeeding if restored. It is unfortunate that the overall DC fandom is the way that it is now, with there literally being two extremely opposing sides of the fandom. I say extremely opposing because the way they go about addressing what is and isn't acceptable in their fandom is just ridiculous. And I know every fandom has its own groups of toxic people, but with DC it's just maddening. Like seriously, you have people on one side of the fandom that think DC should be purely fake, and you have people on the other side that think DC should be purely realistic. I think DC should be both, because it takes more than one storytelling concept to truly make DC be great. And quite frankly, I think DC should move forward and become relevant at some point. I mean, how long are we going to keep having characters be fake for entertainment's sake? How long are we going to keep acting like superheroes can't be morally challenged? And how long are we going to keep prioritizing fanboy bias over nuanced storytelling? Of course, it's been said numerous times that DC is a world centered entirely around fiction, and that stuff like challenging ideals and morality are not the main focus. You should go over to Marvel for that. Except Marvel is not really going by that storytelling concept, at least not currently. Right now, they are going in the direction of having everything be campy and simplified and dumbed down for the sake of viability and brand synergy. They're kind of going back to their original roots, but not in the way I and many other classic Marvel fans would have expected. And on top of that, they're not doing it with the right characters, which is the most frustrating thing about this franchise. Yes, Marvel is the comic book universe of our world, but who is to say that DC can't ever capitalize on that? I mean, after all, DC is the comic book universe of infinite possibilities. Who is to say one of those possibilities can't be them being every bit as dark and serious as Marvel? We've seen that hinted at several times in certain stories, like Injustice as I mentioned previously, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Flashpoint, Kingdom Come, Blackest Night, Superman Darkseid, Identity Crisis. And notice how I bring up some of the most interestingly dark DC stories and not the most obvious ones like Deceased, Hellblazer, and Dark Knight Returns. It's to show that even at its purest form, DC can be every bit as dark and serious as Marvel, possibly better if written by good writers. I'm not doubting that we'll get anything like this under the direction of James Gunn. I mean, this Superman movie, along with Peacemaker, The Suicide Squad, and Creature Commandos, made that absolutely apparent. I'm simply saying that the Elseworlds continuity is better than the main continuity of DC. And I think Gunn knows that, which is why his direction of DC seems to be so linear compared to what Snyder originally had planned for this franchise. But in regards to Superman, I love the symbol. I mean, I've always loved the symbol from the moment I first saw it in the Kingdom Come storyline under the brilliant artwork of Alex Ross. And I absolutely loved seeing it on screen for the first time with Brandon Routh's Superman in the Arrowverse's version of Crisis on Infinite Earths. That was awesome. And seeing it be portrayed as the definitive symbol for Superman in this movie completely surprised me, because I never would have imagined it actually being used to equal or greater effect. From the moment the symbol was advertised in the media, I remembered immediately thinking of it as a gimmick because of how it was being presented. Replacing the original color grading of the symbol to yellow just seemed like a really weird choice to me. And I know what you're thinking, well, they did it on Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that is true, they did. And I didn't like it when they did it, because there was no real exposition given for it, other than it made that version of Superman hopeful again. Because Kingdom Come is one of DC's most compelling stories. It brought forth a lot of interesting ideas, and along with that came a unique looking Superman symbol. And so seeing the Kingdom Come symbol be marketed and advertised the way that it was in the media almost had me thinking that James Gunn was just going to be making an absolute mockery out of it. But after watching this movie and getting a sense of what type of story was being told with this Superman, I now see why James Gunn went with this idea. It suits the theme of this movie perfectly. Speaking of which, Superman's suit in this movie is pretty cool. I'm not exactly a fan of it because it does look pretty clunky. I mean, it literally looks like he's wearing a giant muscle suit. But because this is a new adaptation of Superman, I'm willing to let it slide. For now. As for the other characters, everybody else looks pretty good. But Superman's suit design along with Supergirl's suit design could use some work. Like seriously guys, we don't need this much visual clutter. That was an issue I had with Ezra Miller's Flash and Zack Snyder's DC movies, and that unfortunately continues here. Ultraman is another example of this. Like I get it, he's a bad guy, but come on guys, we don't need to make him look like Snake Eyes on screen. Also, I gotta say, I am not a fan of the trunks. I know, sue me, but personally I always thought the trunks over the outfit look was a really stupid design choice for superheroes, especially for Superman given the fact that he is Kryptonian. I mean, come on, what are the looks of Kryptonians? They wear unique suits. Their clothing is unique. The idea of Superman's suit should really be that it is a suit you can't find anywhere on Earth. I know some stories have likely changed that to have the character look and feel more accessible to the public, but Superman is and will always be Kryptonian. No amount of American customs can change that. And having superheroes wear trunks over their outfits is a really poor design choice for two reasons. One, it looks stupid, and two, it serves no real purpose other than making the hero look stupid. Like, it's just not a professional way to make a hero look heroic, despite what others will tell you. Some may argue that heroes wearing trunks over their outfits serves as protection. My question to that would be exactly how? Because really all you need is a cuff and some Kevlar and you'll be fine. So for Batman, trunks is highly unnecessary. Especially given the fact that certain adaptations have Batman wear his utility belt as a hook on. Because really that's all he needs. And Batman is a super genius, so him wearing trunks would kind of take away from that. Superman certainly doesn't need that kind of protection because he is protection. Besides, I think the best look for superheroes is jumpsuits. This look actually works best for Superman, especially given the fact that, again, he is Kryptonian. And that Kryptonian clothing is fairly unique to our own. There were also some writing choices in this movie that I'm not exactly a fan of, such as the demonizing of Superman's biological parents, and Superman just being unrealistically protective of the people of Metropolis when he's fighting a kaiju. Like I get it, Krypton along with its civilization was doomed to fail because of how predetermined they are to us. But the way this movie goes about addressing that just comes across as a bit disingenuous to what Kryptonian culture is really like. And sure, saving lives may be a big part of Superman's DNA, but it shouldn't really get in the way of every battle he has with the villains he fights. Superhero battles are likely to be every bit as destructive as Dragon Ball Z battles. You can't always present that in a PG fashion. And this is exactly why I feel that Marvel has been really cheap with the presentation of their characters on screen. Because they hardly ever show the realness behind the fights their heroes get into on screen. And whenever they do, it's always either in movies with bad writing or with characters nobody cares about. And David Cornswet's Superman literally epitomizes that a lot in his action scenes on screen. But that's not to say I don't think he'll ever overcome that in later films. I think at some point we're going to have to stop thinking of Superman as a messiah and start thinking of him as a person. Because that's what Man of Steel was all about. It was about presenting the human side of Superman that's hardly ever been shown before, and having him be more reasonable about his approach to heroism. There's many iconic stories that present this. Dan Jurgens' Man of Steel showcases this a lot with the character, along with many other iconic stories in the Elseworlds continuity, which not a lot of people seem to take to. But if I were to give a wild guess, I think the reason why people don't read into the Elseworlds continuity of DC is because they're so used to what the main continuity established that nothing else will do, because to them DC is just perfect. And so they'll just be confused by Man of Steel because it has a radically different approach to adapting the DC universe. I was actually in that camp myself, but then I decided to do my homework, started by reading Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns saga, and my god, is the main continuity just hard to accept as canon after becoming a seasoned reader. If you watched my Man of Steel review, you can tell I still had somewhat of a soft spot for the main continuity, but then turned against it because it aged like cheese. In short, I feel a lot of people only like the main continuity because they don't know any better. It was the one and only DC to them, and there's nothing else to compare it to. Except there is, but people can't read to save their lives. Anyway, to close this out, I had a blast with this movie. Can't wait to see what Mr. Gunn has planned in the future. Would I put this in a category of favorite Superman movie? No, absolutely not. That role goes over to Man of Steel, because of how much it absolutely nails the human relatable aspect of the character, and how much it really got me hooked into liking the character. Would I put this in a category of favorite comic book movie right next to Spider-Man 1 and Aquaman? Absolutely. I think all of the fuss surrounding this movie is a bit absurd and silly. I don't think James Gunn really deserves all the heat he's been getting for the sudden shift in DC cinema. If anything, that heat should really be going over to David Zaslav, because he's the reason why HBO Max killed the DC universe and why watchable DC content is still on the fucking wayside. Like, I'm literally having to fucking pirate all of the DC shows and movies now because of HBO Max, which should really tell you something about how fucking disorganized this franchise is. So if anyone is to take any heat for that, it should really be David Zaslav, because he's the fucking influence behind all that shit. However, I do think that James Gunn should be more professional in his position and not be so combative with people on social media, because it's not really helping him. And this is coming from someone who's had and continues to have quite the experience with that, so there you go. Anyway, stay righteous, my fellow Conrads, and I will talk to you later. #Snyderverse for life.